welcome to the podcast where together, every Monday, we explore hospitality in its very broadest sense. From culture and cooking, cocktails and coffee, nutrition and farming, politics and animal welfare, organic and sustainability, family and business, entrepreneurship, and much, much more. Come and learn with me, Mark Cribb, about where our food and our drink comes from, and the businesses and, more importantly, the human beings that thrive on where we decide to spend our time and our money. Sign up to our weekly newsletter at humansofhospitality.co.uk and hit subscribe on your podcast player of choice. When in the 1990s Guy Singh-Watson started delivering boxes of organic veg to neighbours and friends, he realised he was onto a winner. People loved the fact that the vegetables tasted great and were grown locally. He probably didn't realise just how big a winner it was. Today, Riverford Organic Farmers supply boxes to between 50 and 60,000 households a week and have a team of over 700 people. Now, I was very excited to get to speak with Guy since I've read a number of his blogs about the impact of modern farming and monoculture. Guy really brings to life the impact such approaches of mass production are having on the soil and how important soil is for all of us to be able to continue to live on planet Earth. Fundamentally, I wanted to learn whether organic is really important and how much work should we, as both the hospitality industry and the general public, be putting into thinking about not only where, but how our fruits and vegetables are grown. To say Guy has an opinion or two on this is an understatement, but he makes the case eloquently and enthusiastically for change. Now, while the business has scaled up, the guiding principle behind it has not shifted. As you'll know if you've ever watched Guy's awesome YouTube series, Guy's Rants, for him, respecting the health of our soil through traditional mixed farming rather than rigid specialisation is absolutely vital for the health of all of us. And whether you agree with Guy or not, this programme will definitely make you think about consumer choice and whether the world has gone mad in allowing us to choose delivery times to within 20 minutes or having little gem lettuces flown over from the United States. Should the era of getting what we want when we want it come to an end? Well, let's discuss. Guy Singh-Watson, thank you so much for agreeing to be on the podcast today. Very much appreciated.
You're welcome.
Can you just explain to me where we are on planet Earth, please? I've just spent the last hour driving around some tiny country lanes on a wet and wild winter's day. Where are we?
We're at Badderford Farm now, which is just about a mile up the valley from Riverford, which is where I farmed for 35 years and ran the veg box business. It became employee-owned last year, and I'm taking a bit of a step back. So I bought this farm with Geeti, my wife, and we're growing a few vegetables. And
that was your retirement plan. I'm going to sell the current one and just carry on, but on a smaller scale.
Yeah, it's a bit weird, perhaps. I've kind of gone back to where I started 35 years ago, but it's quite nice to be doing it now with slightly less kind of commercial pressure. I don't have to be thinking at every turn, whether I'm going to be able to make a margin out of this crop. Sometimes I can grow things just because I want to, and we can experiment a little bit more with sort of, innovative growing techniques that I wouldn't have been able to afford to do
Nice.
When I was a young man.
You enjoying it?
I am, yeah. I'm loving it, actually.
Yeah, good. And I'll just mention it now in case it gets really loud. But there's an awesome little whistle that happens occasionally, isn't there? We're not in a wind tunnel. We are sat in your kitchen.
Yeah, there's a gale blowing outside, and the vent on our door sort of whistles. I quite like it, but anyway.
Yeah, it's nice. But just in case anybody thinks there's something odd going on in the background, and the crackling of a wood-fired Argo, which is.
I've been away for a few days. I've just got back and just lit the Essie, which I'll be cooking supper on when we finish with this.
Amazing, good. Well, I will not take up too much of your time. So I very much, you've become a bit of a, I don't know, I'd say the word, hero, font of knowledge. I went off and started doing these podcasts, really talking to people in the hospitality industry, so often chefs or restaurateurs or cooks, but as part of it, started to look at our supply chain and our food chain a little bit more. And really that's the rabbit hole that I've gone down more and more, is where does our food come from? So I'm really looking forward to getting into soil and whether things should be, organic accreditation and all the stuff that you are a font of knowledge on. But before we do that, for people who don't know Riverford as well as you do, it's a big operation, isn't it? Can you just explain a little bit about it? It was 50,000 boxes a week. I had a pizza delivery business for a little while, and just trying to deliver 37 pizzas on a Friday night locally blew my mind. Can you say what does Riverford do now?
We do deliver 50 or 60,000 households a week, and most of them will take a veg box, which we decide the contents of. Some of them will make up their own orders. You can go on our website and order exactly the vegetables you want and the milk, and we do even sell some meat and drinks and so on. But really, vegetables is the heart of what we do. Yeah, so 60,000 deliveries a week, and that seems to have involved a business employing 700 staff, and we turn over 60 million a year.
Wow.
And we really do everything from sowing the seeds, growing, harvesting, storing, packing, delivering, managing all our own IT, websites, databases, right through to actually providing recipes, writing cookery books, and even giving cookery lessons. And we do also run restaurants as well. So it is really a very, very complex business. And that's kind of the way I like it. It's not the way most businesses like it. And it is very challenging running such a complex business. And the only way you can do it successfully is by really engaging with your staff and trusting them and giving them responsibility on the whole to, get on with things and as far as possible getting out of their way, really, which is, I think, a underrated element of management is knowing when to get out of the way.
Definitely. Well, you've done that to the ultimate level since your employee ownership, I think, isn't it? Which I will come on to in a minute. Yeah. But before we do, people ask me how I have time to, run the businesses and run a podcast. And I love coming to see people like you who just 10x that kind of busy lives. Like the fact that you've managed to squeeze me in between a trip to Oxford and a dinner party in about an hour's time. So, yeah, well done. I want to go back in time a little bit before we come into the details around and the issues around the sort of food supply chain, I suppose. So what was the trigger? What got you into organic farming? Because at one point in time, you were also a management consultant, I think, and living in New York. So,
I did. My parents were tenant farmers, but, Riverford was a Church of England tenancy. They started farming in 1951. And, that's where I grew up. Food was everywhere. My mum was a fantastic cook, and most of what she cooked was produced on the farm and in her garden. And that sort of so I grew up with that, knowing where your food comes from and how it's prepared and sharing it, with family and with also other people who worked on the farm. And that's just. I think I was incredibly lucky to grow up. So it's just kind of culturally embedded in me. And really, you could say that Riverford is just a fairly huge extension of that. It is a marriage. That's what I say. My parents were married in 1951 between an enthusiasm for food, largely driven by where it comes from and making the very best of seasonal and local food, combined with an approach to farming which is probably fairly innovative and is sort of slightly restless and unwilling to just do what everyone else does. My dad was pretty innovative in his farming, and I guess and my siblings as well actually have kind of continued with that.
But in the early days, it was I say traditional farming. I'm sure if we go back far enough, all farming was probably organic at one point in our time, wasn't it? But
my dad most definitely not. He started farming when during food rationing. It started in 51, food rationing went on to 54. We had almost been starved into submission by Hitler's U-boats and the importance of producing food, in quantity, being able to feed a nation which hadn't been self-sufficient in food for a long time. That was paramount, really, and that heralded in the agrochemical-driven kind of revolution. So, my father embraced that. He was at the cutting edge of everything. And in 1950, that meant using lots of ammonium nitrate and herbicides, insecticides, and so on. In fact, Riverford was a kind of demonstration farm for ICI in the 60s. So it was through, I suppose, through doing that, and I think probably by the 70s, I was born in 1960, so I was sort of starting to, by the 70s, when I was starting to get involved a bit in the farm, he was getting progressively dissatisfied with that way of farming and was experimenting with, less intensive agriculture. He was never organic, but when I decided to convert the first field in 1986, when I came back to the farm after a couple of years as a management consultant, as you said, he was very supportive of that.
Okay. So if the objective is to make as much food as possible, and that's sort of post-war era, the chemical approach to that, what was it that wasn't working? What was concerning him and then you to the point where you decided to make a change?
I think the soil, really. I mean, I remember walking across fields where crops had failed. I mean, essentially, our land is not massively fertile, and it's really not suited to. The trend at that time was people growing more and more barley, some wheat, largely barley in our area. There was a switch from spring barley to autumn sown barley, and people were just growing it year in, year out without any sort of rotation. And our soils certainly, it was very difficult to do that and to maintain the life and fertility of the soil. Maybe if you threw enough of the right chemicals at it, you could just about manage it. Some people did, but the soil loses its structure. It becomes stripped of, you won't be finding many earthworms. You'll be losing all the mycorrhizal fungi that live around the plant's roots. And it becomes very vulnerable to loss from erosion. It won't hold as much water in the summer because you've lost all the organic matter, which is largely what holds the water in the soil. And yields started declining. And as soon as you get on that slope of declining yields, I remember my father saying this, there is less organic matter going back into the crop. There are less roots. The root system is smaller. There's less, crop residues left. And you are onto a slippery slope of declining fertility. And I think that's what he was seeing on the farm. And I guess that led him to going back to a more, well, in some ways, more traditional rotational way. He grew less and less corn and grew more and more grass. Actually quite contentious now when people talking about the climatic impact of methane emissions from ruminants, sheep and cows largely. But no one was talking about that in those days.
No, very, very true. So if you noticed the impact that we're having, because it seems that organic is still comparatively niche. Why didn't the whole industry notice at the same time the detrimental impact it was having on soil?
Oh, I don't think they did. So that was back in the 60s and 70s when he was starting to think that. I wouldn't have said that soils have become a serious, this health of the soil, I'm not even sure now that it's talked about. I'm not sure how much farmers are really reacting to it, but more progressive farmers, I would say more thinking farmers are. But that's really only happened in the last 5 years. So there was a long period where, if you're feeling judgmental, you could say farmers were just, raping the land and taking whatever they could from it. And at the cost of declining fertility and health of the soils, more runoff, more flooding, more pollution of waterways, and a declining actual fundamental ability to produce food and feed ourselves as a nation.
So very succinctly put, why didn't more people, though, what was unique? You were just particularly interested, because this is 1987, you're right, even now, here we are, what's that, 20 odd years later, and we don't seem to have learned. Was this just something that you felt particularly passionate about?
You mean what made me want to farm organically?
Yeah, what made you want to farm organically? And I'm interested in why you. I sort of think I understand why you did. I'm particularly intrigued, I suppose, also why people didn't. Other people didn't. So I suppose both questions really. What's different about you to the rest of the industry?
Okay, well, I think farmers are, gross generalisations. There are exceptions to what I'm going to say, but most farmers are inherently pretty damn conservative. They really don't like to step out of the mould of, being solid NFU members and carrying on doing what their father did. It's a very, very conservative industry. And, with and there's just within that, there's been a progressive move to something towards farming, which actually many of their fathers would probably be appalled by. Abandonment of what were considered to be sound agricultural techniques, mainly in our area, a balanced rotation and mixture of livestock and arable farming, which has been the basis of agriculture for centuries, and increasingly farms became, in my lifetime, have become more and more specialised. So now, farmers will largely, there'll be a specialist dairy farm, or there'd be a specialist in producing combinable crops, or there'll be specialist sheep and beef, or there'll be a specialist pig producer, almost invariably very intensive, specialist poultry. There's very, very little mixed farming, which I think is, well, I can remember one of my father's neighbours describing it as mixed farming as, mixed farming and muddled thinking. He said, and, there's no doubt that if you are a specialist, you are going to be better and better at doing that. But the sort of complexity that comes from a mixed farm, I think, is just inherently more stable. It's more difficult to manage. It requires more skill, but it's inherently more stable. I mean, if you look at, if you take your lessons from nature, the most stable environments in the world are the ones where there is greatest diversity in terms of the plant and, to a lesser extent, animal species in there. So, look at a native forest, it will always be a mixture of many different species with several canopies within it, and I think we could learn a lot from that. And I suppose I do to some extent draw my inspiration from that. It's very difficult to take so much complexity and run a business where, as farmers, we're expected to produce food. People say that we spend 10% of GDP in this country on food-ish, but the reality is actually that that doesn't go to farmers. The share of GDP that goes to farmers is about 0.7%. Assuming that we all earned the same amount of money, that would imply that each farmer had to feed about 140 people. And if one was going to do that clearly, things have to be mechanized. It's very difficult to mechanize a system with so much diversity in it. And I think that's why we see so little of it. I mean, around here, if I look out of the window of my house here, this was a Church of England tenancy, just like the farm that I grew up in. It would have been surrounded by cider orchards. And it was always said that cider paid the rent until people switched from cider to beer, and then it all sort of collapsed a bit. And the system was that the sheep would graze under the apple trees, and you didn't have to mow the grass, obviously, and then in the autumn you took the sheep out and you collected the apples and then put them back in November or so on after you'd collected the apples. That is a form of what people today would describe as permaculture. And but it was absolutely traditional agriculture. No one does it anymore. It's really the, you can drive up the M5 back up towards Bristol and you'll see cider orchards, and they are purely cider orchards. If they don't mow in between the rows, they'll more commonly actually spray off underneath it. There are no sheep there because the guy who makes the cider doesn't know anything about sheep. And the guy who keeps the sheep doesn't know anything about cider. And so we no longer have that sort of mixed, highly skill-intensive agriculture. Instead, we have these ever larger, ever more specialised holdings. I'm afraid I am going to say doing ever more damage to the soil.
So as I go on these adventures and learn about, this kind of stuff, and I've Omnivore's Dilemma, have you read that? No? Okay. So,
I haven't.
You've heard of it, have you?
No.
Okay. So it's probably started off my kind of understanding a little bit, I guess, around monocultures and the fact that we used to use perennials and the impact we're having, and we'll go into a little bit more detail on that. But what I don't understand, I suppose, is that I get the fact that we needed to try and produce food cheaper. I get the fact that we thought that having, being a specialist in one thing was a better solution. But I guess I'm surprised by the fact that we haven't learned that it is. There seems to be predominantly negative impacts. Yes, we can grow a lot of food, but we're now learning that the environmental implications are so poor. So the bit that I suppose I would like to be more of an optimist on, I guess, is the fact that we have realised it and there is a solution. Because if we've lost all of that knowledge and ability, what's your thoughts? Is this a resolvable issue, or are we beyond the point of no return? Or?
It is a resolvable issue. I mean, not easily, but I mean, it is. I think there's a tremendous amount to be gained by farmers cooperating with each other. So, I've been a specialist vegetable grower. In my youth, I kept pigs and sheep and so on, but really what I know about is vegetables. My brother is a specialist dairy producer. We can work together so we can have a sound rotation, as we do, where the grass will be in a mixture, red clover, grass lays for 1, 2, 3, 4 years. And then we might grow vegetables. I look after the vegetables, so I'll take that field. Sometimes I rent him a field and he'll have the grass, and he rents me a field and I grow the vegetables for a couple of years. And thereby we have a rotation, but we also have we're able to specialise in our particular enterprises, but also have the benefit of a more mixed farming system. And I think one could go further than that. I think we could include, we are planting orchard, mainly my brother Oliver planting orchard on the farm, and I'm intercropping it with artichokes. And as the trees get bigger, the artichokes will go and it'll go back down to grass. I would like to start planting nuts on the farm. And it's probably sensible that I don't do all that myself. I think it's better that, if you can give an opportunity for someone else to grow the nuts and, who really is a specialist in that and who's gone around and researched, how to do it and how to mechanize it and reduce labor input. I think that's a good way to go. So on the farm that Geeti and I bought here, we have got a guy who's producing seed, albeit on quite a small scale. We're starting to work with another woman who's a specialist in perennial vegetables. We rent out the grass to our neighbour, who's a beef producer, and we do grow some vegetables as part of that sort of rotation. But we're all sort of working together in a way and cooperating, which I think enables us to have a more balanced and sustainable farming system without that mixed farming and muddled thinking, which you can't be good at everything, and with the commercial pressure that farming's under. Probably the same in any business. Whatever you do, I'm sure you've found the same in catering. You've got to be good at what you do.
Yeah.
And you can't expect your customers to subsidise you for your incompetence.
Yeah. And that often is the challenge, is that we have so much good intention that we want to make the system better. The first thing has to be the knowledge. And first of all, we've got to know there's a problem. And then once we know there's a problem, we need to try and understand what the solution is, but then we need to be able to finance the solution, because obviously if it's a much more expensive way of solving a problem, same with me in the restaurants about the provenance of the food and what I want to sell.
I haven't actually done the sums, but if you say that farmers are getting 0.7% of GDP, if they got 0.8 or 0.9%, I mean, no one would even notice the difference, and we really could have a really... we could see wildlife returning to the countryside. We could have a much more, complex and sustainable farming system, and probably have better quality food as well. But it does require a kind of investment in knowledge. It requires trust. It requires long-term relationships. All those things, which really are the antithesis of modern, capitalism, which is all about responsiveness to ever-changing customer demands and so on. I would say customer whims. And I think we need to challenge that paradigm, actually, that you can have whatever you want, eat whatever you want, whatever time of the year, and it can be delivered to you in a 20-minute time slot, tomorrow, possibly even today. I mean, that's the way, the food, my business, the home delivery of food, really, which is what Riverford does. That's the way it's going. And I find it appalling, actually. I mean, I really, I have to say, the sort of pandering to ever-changing whims of customers, the wanting ever greater convenience, ever more consistency, ever better cosmetic quality, and an ever lower price, is just destroying. It's not just the environment, actually. It's destroying our culture. It's destroying the social fabric of the countryside. It is I kind of feel if you externalized all the costs associated with our food, the way it's being produced now, it really wouldn't be cheap at all. It's insane, actually. I mean, I'm surrounded by dairy farmers. That my father started off milking 20 cows. By the time he retired and my brother took over, he had two herds of 100 cows. He'd grown a lot, but there was still within the parish. There were probably 10 farmers milking less than 100 cows. Now there are 2 farmers, and they've both got over 1,000 cows, and it's just getting bigger and bigger. The cows don't go out at all. They eat. Sorry, that's not fair. They do go out, and during the dry part of their rotation, but mostly they're indoors. They're fed maize silage, an annual crop which doesn't really like growing in our countryside. I mean, we're sitting here looking out a day where it's been raining a lot. Not much of the maize silage has been cut. It's a disaster for the environment, but cows do, I have to say, they do, produce a hell of a lot of milk on it. But the cost, I mean, the Environment Agency just was pulling its hair out. It looks like we're going to have another wet autumn. The hard maize will be harvested late in wet conditions. The soil will be compacted. There'll be no possibility of sowing everything after it. The land will be bare through the winter. There'll be, runoff, pollution of the rivers, loss of soil. Maize is, and it's to feed an animal which should be eating grass. It should be eating a perennial crop, which is, down permanently, managed correctly, would be sequestering carbon, and contributing, possibly contributing to averting some of the climate change. Instead, we're growing maize. And why we're doing it? We're doing it because the costs of growing that crop. Yes, you can produce milk slightly cheaper, but if the under our economic system, but if the costs of producing milk in that way were internalized, no one would be growing maize.
What do you mean by that?
So if there was a system by which I think the current carbon trading price is maybe £30 a tonne. I'm not entirely competent at these figures, but I'm guessing that you're growing maize, you're probably losing 1 to 2 tonnes of carbon out of the soil a year. A permanent pasture would probably be sequestering 1 to 2 tonnes. The difference is 4 tonnes of carbon a year times £30, which is a ludicrously low price. The carbon trading price should be £100 a tonne. But it is that would be £150 an acre. If you had to pay £150 an acre to grow maize, no one would grow it.
What's a carbon trading price? Sorry.
There is this idea when everyone talks about there being carbon zero as a business or carbon zero even as a nation.
Yeah.
We're not going to be. The idea is that you are going to offset your carbon by paying someone else to do something which will reduce carbon, and that could be growing forests. So you can fly to New York and pay someone to plant a couple of trees or something. Yeah. I'm incredibly sceptical of this. But there is an argument for it, and of course, the cost of letting all that carbon dioxide go into the air, ultimately, it may not be us, be our children, maybe our children's children, and they'll be paying the price for that. And £30 a tonne will seem bloody cheap, when London's underwater. Yeah. So, I mean, the problem, what's driving agriculture and probably driving loads of industries, most industries probably, is an economic system which doesn't account for the true costs of what they're doing. The costs are externalized and borne by other people. So, we spray let's say we put lots of ammonium nitrate on the land, the nitrates end up in the water. The water company downstream has to pay money to take the nitrates out of the water. It's extremely expensive, actually. Some water authorities are actually paying farmers not to use ammonium nitrate. That's the basis, really, of the nitrate-sensitive zones thing. I mean, that's a very, you can see that one. That's a very direct one. Someone else feels the benefit of putting the ammonium nitrate on and growing more grass and producing cheap milk more cheaply. Someone else has to pay for clearing it up. Well, I mean, that's the problem. That's a microcosm of, so many of our problems, really. I think most people would, in theory, agree with the idea that the polluter pays. I mean, how do you get them to pay? I mean, the problem is that the polluter, very rarely has to pay. And if they did, had to pay for the long-term impact of their pollution, a lot of the things that go on today wouldn't, and we'd live in a better world. But I mean, the capitalism is incredibly clumsy. I mean, it just can't account for these things. And actually, I don't think it has a hope of ever accounting for it. Possibly carbon trading might help some of our problems, but I still think, capitalism is an incredibly blunt, instrument.
What I am very relieved by is the fact that with all of these kind of mounting problems that just sound, and exactly the reason that I do this podcast is because I like to think that people make decisions all too often subconsciously rather than consciously. I think if you articulate these things to a lot of consumers, they don't want to screw up the planet. They don't want to have this system. A lot of the time they don't get it. Yes, they quite quickly will forget it and bury it all too often, even after they've been taught it, they'll rapidly try and unlearn it. But I think most people are fundamentally decent. And
I agree with that. I think most people are better, more generous, more considerate, more willing to cooperate and more altruistic than our governments and institutions give them credit for. We just haven't found a way of sort of harnessing that.
And I hope that now, whereas information used to come top down, so we used to be told by the government what to eat and how much protein we should have and where our food should come from. I hope that now we've got this peer-to-peer kind of instantaneous communication. There's obviously a lot of downsides to social media, but actually the ability to share information, finding out whether it's fake or whether it's true, is a challenge. But seasonality, I mean, you touched on that just now, I guess. The fact that we now expect to be able to eat whatever food whenever we want. They expect to be able to order it and have it delivered in a 20-minute time slot. I love the fact that your boxes just have in them what you're growing, what's right to be delivered at that time. So I guess I've got two questions. One is, was the original motivation to deliver boxes and to deliver it that way as a solution to sort of almost bypass most of this system that doesn't work? And then secondly, have you seen more people caring about that and being happy just to take what's seasonal? Because you inferred from the kind of the demand of a delivery slot in 20 minutes that actually potentially the situation's getting worse rather than better, I guess.
Well, I think both things are going on in tandem. Things are getting better and things are getting worse in other ways.
I think you're right.
Your first question was about did I set out to do the veg box?
Yeah, was the veg box the solution? So you saw the problem, you saw the issue. Was the veg box?
I think I have a very entrepreneurial nature, and I'm also pretty damn contrarian. When I see everybody else doing one thing, I'm afraid to say it's a little bit childish and things, not something I'm very proud of, but I kind of tend to want to go in the other direction. But I think that has led me to look at the world in a different way. And often when everyone else is doing something which really is kind of stupid, that gives you an opportunity to do it in a different way. And I suppose I was never convinced that people really did want all that choice that you saw when you were, as I was growing up, obviously supermarkets have taken over essentially retail, in particular, certainly in fresh produce is now over 80%. When I started, it was about 60%. And, when my parents were around, it was probably about 6% of retail of produce would go through supermarkets. And the premise that they work on is that everyone wants ever greater choice. There were 10,000 SKUs, individual lines in a supermarket, then 20,000, then 30,000. I believe even 70,000 is not unusual. Now, I mean, who the hell wants all that choice? I mean, it just makes me, I just find it incredibly stressful when I go to a restaurant with a long menu. I just don't want it. I just want to what's good, what's best now. And anyway, so I suppose that did lead to the veg box scheme. I always questioned whether people really did want that choice. So it wasn't my idea. I was copying some friends who had started a box scheme up the road. And indeed, when I did walk up the garden path, I did all the deliveries myself for the first 2 or 3 years, with what was a very crude offering. And I'd knock on the door, someone would open it, and they really did care, what the vegetables taste like, that they were grown locally, that they knew the person that they grew, they knew the kind of story, that they felt a connection to them, that it was part of their sort of culture, that they cared what they tasted like more than what they looked like. Price was important, but it wasn't everything, and they didn't want any of that packaging, most of which served no function anyway. So, and I just knew the first day that the first week we delivered 30 veg boxes, and I knew from there that I was on to a winner, really. I mean, it was to get that sort of reception And the contrast between that and speaking to a supermarket buyer, was marked. And in the early days, actually, I did try and supply directly to a supermarket. And anyway, they wanted me to come up. I was setting up a tiny little pack house that met all their, hygiene regulations and everything. And I'd agreed a program to grow, as I remember, it was little gem lettuce, icebergs, white cabbage and potatoes, I think. And the buyer said, yeah, we'd like you to come up and meet our technical, manager. And I said, okay, yeah, that's fine. And he said, yeah, no, it'll be Thursday next week. And I said, there's no chance we could make it Friday, is there? Because I've got to be in London for the weekend. And the phone went dead on me. And I called back and I said, I'm terribly sorry. I think we must have been cut off. And the guy did say to me, he said, no, Sonny, when we whistle, you jump. The only question is how high.
Really?
I just thought, you know what? No one's going to talk to me like that.
No.
And the funniest thing, and I did, that was it. I started building this pack house and I'd go out with a sledgehammer and I just took out my aggression. And that was the end of of supplying that particular supermarket direct. And the interesting thing was that I did actually meet that bloke. And he was an absolute teddy bear. He was a really nice bloke. I mean, so what was making him behave like that? And I think all our behaviour is really, to a large extent, to a shocking extent, actually shaped by the behaviour and the expectations and the norms of those around us. If you sit in a room in a buying office of a supermarket and everyone else is just being vile, treating human beings in a way that no human being should treat another human being. If everyone else is doing it, it becomes normal. And if your boss is rewarding you and your next promotion is solely dependent on your ability to generate margin per foot of shelf space on a supermarket, that becomes the norm and that's how people behave. And I just find it absolutely shocking. And I think we have pioneered a supply chain, a relationship with the growers that we work with the farmers, many of whom are personal friends, which is very different to that. And actually, ultimately, not only do I think is it more humane and fulfilling and less stressful, I actually think it's economically more efficient because we agree a program with them that we're going to buy so many tons of broccoli in, week 34, and we buy so many tons of broccoli and we pay them what we agreed to pay. They don't need to worry about it, always, And that means that they can just get on with growing broccoli and becoming bloody good at growing broccoli. They don't need to be, worrying about, how a supermarket buyer is going to behave. It's extremely expensive dealing with supermarkets. It's very, very wasteful. And that's why, we often can be substantially cheaper. Well, we normally are cheaper because, we don't have all that bullshit. And we have less waste as a result. When you walk through one of our fields, it is pretty much stumps at the end. The wastage is absolutely minimal.
And this wastage issue is because the supermarkets are very precise in what they demand, and you almost have to overgrow to supply.
Yeah, they will. They will tell you. You'll have a discussion. You probably will agree a price. No guarantee that they're going to stick to the price. You'll have to stick to the price. There's no way you're going to get more than that price. But they're quite likely to change it. Say they want to put your product on promotion, or just decide that they don't want to pay it anyway. But that's bad enough. But probably the worst thing is the volume thing. I mean, if they don't, if for whatever reason people, I don't know, it's a cloudy June and you've got loads of lettuce and people eat less salads when it's cloudy, then you will waste. We used to have to plant 2 lettuces for each one that we sold to a supermarket, because you have to make sure that you have availability. If you don't have availability of what they want to buy, even if it's more than what they agreed to buy, if you don't have the availability that week, they will have a complete and utter tantrum and you will lose the contract. You may even have to, if you're a large packer, you may even have to air freight it in from California, in order to meet their demand. That happens on a regular basis. And, if people don't have lettuce, it's not the end of the world. No one's going to die, or if you have to buy a butterhead lettuce instead of a little gem, it's really not the end of the world. And, we might plan to put cauliflowers in our boxes that week, but if for some reason, there's been a frost and there's broccoli available and we put 2 small cauliflowers in, that's the other thing. If they don't meet the predetermined specification for cauliflowers, it was 11 centimetres across. If they only get to 10.5, forget it. You can just, mow the whole lot off, whereas we'll just put 2 cauliflowers in. There is so much ludicrous waste in the food system, and it's generally around meeting consumers. I hate that word, but anyway, let's use it for now. Consumers, perceived desires, sometimes called needs, but really I would say whims. And a lot of times people don't even know what they want, so they would perfectly happily eat a cauliflower instead of a broccoli if that's, what's available that week. So it's tremendously wasteful. But we have built a whole culture around the idea that if you've got money in your pocket, you're king. If you've got the money, you can have what the hell you like, and everyone else, will be bent out of shape to give you what you want as long as you've got the money in the pocket. And I just think it's weird, and it's destroying our culture and our planet.
Weird is the word, isn't it? And this is why I think it's so important to have the conversation, because you're right. Most people wouldn't care what lettuce they have, or if there's no lettuce, having something else when they walk into a shop. So it isn't coming from the consumer. The consumer just, doesn't realise. If I'm sure if you ask the consumer and say, look, we're out of this salad, we can fly one from California for you, would you like it? They go, no, it's cool, I'll just have that. We don't even ask them, we just do it. It makes your head hurt, doesn't it?
It's all based on the idea that an informed consumer who knows exactly what they want will shape the economy and the key word there, I think, is informed. I mean, a lot of people just don't know what they want, and if they had the information, around the environmental impact of their choices, I think they would very often make different choices. I've been, I suppose, about 20 years. I don't know, you probably won't remember. There was a time when Tesco said they were going to carbon label every item in their store. I think they got to about a packet of crisps and a bottle of shampoo or something and gave up. I don't know whether they actually really had any intention to. And slightly to my shame, we decided we were going to carbon label our boxes for a bit. I think I have grown up a bit since then, really. But the idea that we were going to carbon label our box, and one box would have a lower carbon footprint than another one, and therefore people would buy the lowest carbon footprint box, and that would drive us to change the way we ran a business, and we would grow lower carbon. It's just absolute tosh. We actually did it for about 6 months, and I didn't, out of my 30,000 customers or something, but I never met a single person whose purchasing decision had been influenced by that work. It is a completely ridiculous paradigm, but it's still the one that is used. The idea that individual consumers will shape the world that we can live in. And the reason it's used, because it enables businesses to carry on as normal. It enables them to fight off regulation. It's used, we don't need to regulate the telecom industry because we can all change our phone account. We don't need to regulate banking because you can go to a different bank. We don't need to regulate farming because you can, you don't have to buy battery eggs. You can now buy free-range eggs. So that's about the only example that I can think of where actually consumer power has led to a change. It has led to us getting rid of battery cages, and a damn good thing too. But there are very, very few examples, I would say, where it has been effective. It's a kind of smokescreen behind which businesses can carry on as normal, and behind which governments can abdicate the responsibilities they have to act in the interests of their citizens.
So you're saying that when people don't make the decision, so if you carbon labelled a box, it had no impact on the decision people make, and therefore
Absolutely
the solution
none.
is actually to change. You as the middleman or as the supplier needs to make the decision for the consumer and actually supply what's right.
Yeah, it was a very interesting exercise.
It is,
we did
it's fascinating.
going back to, I think it was 2005 and 6 we did this. And, we did measure everything that we did, and it really did expose what were the most environmentally damaging things about the business. And some of them we could change relatively easily, actually. But it was up to us to do that. It was our responsibility to do that. And it was the responsibility of government to regulate us, to encourage us, or even make us, encourage us through a taxation system or make us through legislation do those things. It is not realistically up to the consumer. Let's call them food citizens. I think it's a more positive term. It's not up to the food citizen to shape the agriculture we have in this country through that level of knowledge. Because how are they ever going to know that? I mean, I had someone working for, I don't know, a couple of years on that project, and even so, it was, some of our measurements were pretty crude, and so how on earth is a food citizen, an individual, going to be able to make those informed decisions? I mean, it is so utterly ridiculous. It's astonishing that anybody ever gave it any credence at all. I mean, we still give it, though. I mean, everyone will say, and my wife, there's something we argue about quite a lot, will say, you vote 3 times a day, with what you choose to eat.
Yep.
And there is truth in that, and there are some positive things. I mean, the move towards eating less meat, absolutely fantastic. It is, but as the main thing that is going to shape a better world, that is going to avert a climate catastrophe, it's just hopeless. It's not going to happen. We really do need businesses to be properly regulated, and we need governments to show a bit more courage to act for the long-term interests of their citizens, and not just the ones today. The ones a generation and 2 generations down the line. That's what we need to do, and we need them to stand up to the lobbying that comes from commercial companies. Who are very, very persuasive in allowing things to carry on as normal, whether it's food additives, whether it's diesel cars in cities, all stuff that really should be much, much more regulated. There is a whole lobby out there, very active in Westminster, and I'm told even more active, in Brussels.
Interesting. It's... I guess, one of the things I always say about this podcast, and one of the reasons I'm trying to educate people around these issues, is I do fundamentally believe that where we spend our money has an impact on the kind of world we're going to live on. It's interesting that, you're right. The level of how people are informed is interesting. I have this debate a lot with my chefs. I feel, as a restaurateur, that in our industry, we should know more about our food supply chain and more about where our food comes from and more about the impact of food than the consumer.
It's not easy, though, is it?
It's not easy. And that's it. Even, the reasons I love coming out and having these conversations, and I've only been doing this for the last 6 months, and you're putting a significant amount of time aside and actually going and speaking directly to the producers is still blowing my mind. And then I was with Andrew Stephen from the Sustainable Restaurant Association a couple of weeks ago, and we were chatting about people who think they're making the right decision. So they'll go, they'll buy local with their meat, for example. But you've also got to look at what's that animal being fed, and is it being fed soy? And it was in the news a couple of days ago about animals being fed soy from the Amazon forest. And even though you think you're buying a local animal, so it's incredibly complicated and nuanced, isn't it, to be informed? So I do feel that we have a moral responsibility, at least. We don't have a legal responsibility at the moment, but I think we have a moral responsibility to try and educate our customers around what to buy. It's interesting when you say about, the carbon and giving people the information, because I've often said, look, we should have organic, free-range chicken on one side of the menu, and I would never sell, the utter shit. But even the red tractor kind of RSPCA chicken, which I still don't think is an acceptable compromise, almost give people the choice and see where they spend their money. But it's interesting that you say it doesn't make any difference. Actually, we just need to take the moral responsibility. The trouble is, and this is probably why it needs to come from government, I suppose, is that if only a few people do that, you're kind of, you're in a market where you're more expensive than your competitor, and money talks, and it's hard to get the customer to have the level of knowledge where they'll spend the extra, I guess.
I'm sure that's true, and I think one of the biggest problems, and actually I think food service it's worse than food retail, is that, there are so many people lying, or if you're going to be charitable, being economic with the truth, or misleading in their claims on their menu. How many times do you see local, organic, and seasonal?
Yeah, well, nobody, unfortunately, says what the definition of artisan or even local is. These things are just words, and then the big players see it, and they jump on the bandwagon. And then everybody uses it. Boutique hotel. I've got a little hotel, and it was called boutique for a while because there wasn't another genre. And then there was a 150 bedroom boutique hotel that opened, and I was like, what does that mean? It does, people just jump on board the bullshit, I suppose. So it's incredibly frustrating. But the trouble is...
And there are lots of people out there. If you say something's organic and it's not, I mean, you are breaking the law,
Yeah.
but no one will do anything about it. I mean, it is the trading standards. I mean, I am a bit of a bore on this. I will, when I go into a shop and they'll say, oh, it's all organic. And I'll say, oh, what is? And I will persist and they won't know. And in the end, I'll get the manager. And in the end, it'll turn out the only thing is the canned sweet corn or something. And very often they kind of make me feel like I'm being pedantic about this. And it just drives me absolutely mad. Actually, no, you are lying. You're lying to your customers. You're being deceitful. And actually, it's illegal, but you carry on doing it and no one will do anything about it. And you're made to feel somehow ridiculous by, when you ask the waiter, what does that actually mean? What is local? What is organic?
Yep.
And they won't know. And you'll spend a lot of time, by which time all the people you're having dinner with will be bored of you for getting a bit annoyed and embarrassed, and you ruin the evening by just asking someone to tell you the truth.
Yeah. And we should do that more.
I would ask if you really, if you would care, the key is to ask those difficult questions and not be fobbed off with easy answers. Ask for something specific. When they say it's local, say what is local, and I say what farm does it come from, and really drill down into the detail, and then it tends to all start falling apart quite quickly. And if enough people ask, things will change, but you do need to be fairly persistent. You do need to be prepared to be a pain in the arse, actually.
Yeah, and have
which
no
can
friends.
Can be a bit boring for your friends.
Yeah, go out for dinner on your own a lot, or even just in my house. It is difficult from the restaurant to, we tried to specify the farm for quite a long time. And it is unfortunately back to what you were saying, is giving the consumer what they want to buy rather than what we should provide, because it comes down to the whole animal kind of thing. So if you're going to one farm and you only want to sell, ribeye and sirloins or fillets, and that's what you're buying, where's the rest of the animal going? And yes, some of it should be turned into burgers.
And it is very difficult to do. And, there probably are things, that we do that I would, be in danger of being called a hypocrite. But I think it is important to be as specific as possible.
Yes.
So if you're going to say, as much of it as possible, don't say as much of it as possible as organic. Yeah. Say whatever percentage it is, and over a year measure it and just put the percentage down. Say something specific. Don't make, woolly claims and hope that people are just going to extrapolate from that and believe that you're a saint. Well, of course, unfortunately, most people just want to hear the answer that they want to hear, and that's what they believe. And the catering trade has been pretty dishonest in exploiting that, and I'm afraid it does upset me quite a lot.
Yeah, well, no, it upsets me a lot as well, and we're just trying to work out how are we going to resolve this. We're on this constant quest to improve provenance. We've just got some production space because actually, you need to close the gap. You need to get closer to the farmer. As ideally, I want to know the people that we buy from. And when you're buying through a butcher, and particularly if you're trying to do food at scale, it can be incredibly difficult for that butcher to keep constant correspondence as to exactly what farm he's been to. But using the whole animal, kind of carcass and getting closer makes absolutely a lot of sense. But you've then got to have some production space. So we've just acquired some space with a huge walk-in fridge, walk-in freezer, some big production space, and then we can go to the farm. So exactly the same with chickens, where I've been. The team would probably say, "Look, we need to tell people that we use, better chickens than 80% of the rest of the restaurants." And I'm going, "No, it's still a shitty product. I'm still not happy to go out and say this is great. I can go out and say it's not as bad as other people, but that's not comfortable." Whereas now we're almost at the point where we can go directly to the chicken farmer and say, "Look, whereas at the minute we get fillets delivered every day, now we'll say, look, deliver us 200 birds a week, whole birds, deliver them to this location. We'll butcher them, we'll separate them, we'll send them to our restaurant."
Sometimes it is about just being prepared to say sometimes, that can't be on your menu. I don't know how your restaurant works, Mark, but, the ones that I have supplied over the years, actually, the number of people who are really prepared to sort of compromise. I mean, if you're going to buy the way that everyone says they're going to buy, and it's local and it's seasonal, it's not going to be reliable. You can't have, the reliability comes from, if you haven't got basil, you can buy it, it can be flown in from somewhere else. You haven't got strawberries, someone will put them on a plane. That's how you can have strawberries on your menu in a constant way. I think it's almost impossible to have a sustainable supply chain in food service and to have a constant menu. Some cases I've spoken to chains of restaurants, not cheap restaurants, I mean, not the very top end, but, pretty good restaurants, and who print their menus or have planned their menus 18 months ahead. It's just at which point I just walk out the door and say, there's no way we can supply you. Yeah. As a matter of fact, we do supply a chain of I'm not going to say which one. Anyway, but and they do. We've been at it for years. I mean, they do really want to do a better job of it, and it has taken us a long time to find out a few products that we can supply to them reliably. But they do have, they do plan their menus a long time ahead. And I was working in their development kitchen with their executive chef, and we were cooking a few things up. And after a while, I said, we could do this, we could do that. And in the end, he said to me, Guy, what you got to understand is that our chefs can't cook.
Really?
I mean, that's pretty appalling. This was not a bottom of the road.
Yeah, okay, well, I'm glad you didn't mention the name, because Miranda would have had a heart attack.
No, I'm not. So, and from my observation of the catering industry, having run restaurants myself, and is that chefs can be difficult. Most people do not want to be dependent on an emotional, sometimes highly egotistical chef. And the way to avoid being dependent on that chef is to de-skill your kitchen. So if they walk out, someone else can step in very quickly. Yep. And obviously you can save money by that because you're going to pay them less as well. The only way you can de-skill your kitchen is to reduce it to a, by numbers operation.
Keep things up.
The only way you can do that is to have a reliable supply chain that is inconsistent with buying from local producers who are going to be less reliable than a wholesale market or Breaks Brothers or 663 or whatever they're called, all the Sodexo and all the rest of them. And that sounds fairly depressing, but I can tell you, after now, I suppose it's about 15 years since we opened a field kitchen down on the farm, I can actually honestly say it doesn't have to be like that, because there are lots of chefs. There are more and more chefs who just do not want to work within that system, and they're looking for something different. And we actually we seem to find it really quite easy to recruit chefs who are skilled enough to be able to manage an ever-changing menu and to be able to control their costs. And we have a fantastically successful restaurant, which is really pretty profitable. I have to say it wasn't for many years. I lost a lot of money, but it is possible. And there are lots of people who want to work like that. And it's about having faith in your fellow human beings in the end, I think, because there are lots of chefs who want to do things differently and who really care about what they want to do, but they need to be given the autonomy and the space to be able to do things in their own way and not have an accountant sitting on them from one service to the next, asking what their margin is. I mean, clearly they need to be accountable for their margin at the end of the month, but you've got to give them have a bit of space. Anyway, I'm teaching grandmother to suck eggs. I agree.
This isn't about, exactly. It's not about my restaurants. It is about the industry. We change our menu with the seasons. We follow it 3 times a year. I change it 3, if not 4 times a year. It is really difficult. The margins are super tight. Will the consumer pay? But there are things you can do. Fish is an obvious one for me. People get upset if there's no fish, but we only buy from the day boats. I refuse to buy fish on a global level.
Well, absolutely good on you, because I mean, fish is the absolute classic. If anyone, the number of people who say that we only buy from the day boats in lieu and whatever, and you think, oh really? And and you manage to have a bass on your menu every day.
Every day. Yeah.
What happens when there's an easterly wind and those fishermen can't go out for a week or whatever? How are you getting your fish there? No, we do sometimes get it from a wholesaler, and that does come from a beam trawler in Newlyn, and it's 10 days old before it's landed, and it's bloody raping the ocean every time they go out.
Exactly, and that's the frustration, is getting the consumer to understand. I've got no problem running out of fish on a Monday and Tuesday because it's been stormy over the weekend and there's no boats gone out, and therefore we haven't got any fish. And
Great.
That should be the way it is, in the same that it should be a case of this is the vegetables that are available this week. So the idea of following seasonality of vegetables, which is why we at the moment we don't have an organic supply route, and certainly not an affordable one into my restaurants. But we're looking at every single bit on the menu and seeing how we can improve it. And that's probably a separate conversation, because you may be able to assist with that. But I certainly think if the sides are fundamentally seasonal, seasonal greens, seasonal veg, whatever, and ours predominantly are, there is a challenge around. I appreciate whether pumpkins are 2 weeks late or squashes are late, or the sweet corn was later this year, I think, wasn't it, because it was colder in spring, and then you got them late. And we can't. Chef would love to put steak with corn on the cob on the menu. So it's nuanced, and I absolutely get the challenges, and we're far from perfect. But unfortunately, we are in a sector that's completely greenwashed. I'm sort of conscious of time, but I've got a couple of things I want to touch on, because in the restaurant industry, our market rates for vegetables fluctuate all of the time, depending on weather and what's happening. I'm sure what you're saying about the market being flooded. How do you manage to agree a price with farmers a year in advance that's not impacted by weather, for example?
Well, I mean, it is difficult, and it's taken us, many years, 3 and a bit decades to get there. But and trust is absolutely critical in that, because in the early days, we would agree a price for cauliflower in January, and you got a cold spell in January, and suddenly we wouldn't have any cauliflowers because the price would have skyrocketed, and they'd just go and sell them somewhere else.
Yeah.
Now they know that we will pay what we agreed to pay, and we'll take the volume that we agreed to pay, and they may sell if they've got any. They'll go and make some money out of the rest of their crop, but they will honour us because we have honoured our word with them, and we do. We normally do get what we ask for. I mean, there are times when things go wrong, for sure. And cauliflowers are probably one of the most difficult ones, and purple sprouting broccoli in January and February would be one of the most difficult ones to manage. But it's all dependent on trust, really, and that's trust between us and the grower, but actually trust between us and our customers as well, the people who are buying the veg boxes, and we can, and trust and genuine information. And if we explain why we don't have cauliflowers, people are pretty happy to accept that. And so yeah, we do maintain a stable price. We do take, our boxes are the same price throughout the year. The most expensive time for vegetables, actually, you'd probably be quite surprised, but well, maybe you wouldn't be, but most people would be surprised. The most expensive time is actually the start of the UK season, because at the beginning it's quite, you have to work harder to get a crop essentially, and you often do at the end as well. And that's when, we will pay more, and, we'll take less of a margin. And then the easiest time is the kind of late summer and autumn, and we'll probably take a slightly larger margin then to kind of make up for it.
Yeah, no, which I guess makes sense, but must be challenging just thinking as a restaurateur, because it drives us bonkers. Lemons are a bad example, I suppose we don't grow them locally, but the fact that they can go from, kind of £12 a box to £40 a box, depending on in the year when you're buying them, and all you're doing is putting them in somebody's gin and tonic, and you can't double the price of the gin and tonic because lemons have gone up. So it's it's
about over 90% of what we put in the box will come from a grower that we know well, and will be on a pre-arranged contract, and almost always it's someone that we've dealt with for many, many years, and that is absolutely unique in the fresh produce industry. Our local growers, South Devon Organic Producers, whom there are about 16 members of the co-op now, we actually have the contract as a 7-year contract.
Wow,
It
really?
would take us either of us 7 years. That is really kind of exceptional and not only that, is that no one looks at it anyway. It just lives in the bottom drawer.
Amazing.
Because it's all just based on trust now. But it's taken us a long, long time to get there. We've tried to do the same thing with fish, and I have to say it's been very, very difficult. Some of the fishermen we work with will probably say that we didn't do what we said we would do. I would say they didn't do what they said. We never got to that point where we trusted each other well enough. And it's the fish trade is very murky, isn't it? There's a huge amount of black fish sold. The quota system is everyone's dodging.
Quotas, it's such a mess.
So you're into even before you start, you're into a very, very murky system where everyone's lying to everyone else, and we haven't really been able to break through that. And the only way that we've got close, I would say, is by actually buying it. And we couldn't agree on what a sustainable fish was either. It's very, very difficult. So we ended up just selling line caught from day boats. So that is probably impractically harsh in terms of our criteria of what a sustainable fish is. And the truth is, we're farmers. We don't know about fishing. Who are we to say what a sustainable fish is? But that was the only thing that anyone could agree with. Yeah. And so you had to. So you're never going to have continuity of supply. So so we actually played around with freezing it.
Yeah.
And we found that actually, if it was frozen really well and really quickly and held at a really low temperature, the eating quality was every bit as good as fresh fish, and that's what we've done. But it's been difficult.
Yeah, no, it is really complicated. Fish move, basically. Not only do they move, I mean, animals move around in a field, maybe from field to field, but fish move around the globe, and it's really complicated. Vegetables must be easier. I interviewed Mitch Tonks a couple of weeks ago, who very good fish chef, and he agrees 100%. Freezing fish actually is part of the solution to the problem, rather than the issue. So I could talk to you about all of that. For days, because it does blow my mind, the complexity. And I worry slightly about, if it's so complicated, how are we ever going to resolve it? I hope more and more people buy veg boxes direct, because it seems to bypass a lot of the sort of bullshit and sort out and just get what they're given rather than going in and tweaking it. And I never really appreciated it. I used one of your competitors some time ago where I could go in, and I actually thought that was really good, that I could go in every week and change whatever I wanted. God knows how they managed the complexity of it behind the scenes. But now, I'm a customer and I love just getting whatever rocks up. Those, was it Romanescos, was it? Last couple of weeks, never had them before. They're amazing, and the fact that you can just break off the florets and eat them in a salad. They don't even need to be cooked. I'm not. This isn't like an advert for you, but I just bloody love the fact that I'm eating what I give, and I actually like to go into restaurants and do that and just say, look, just send me out what chef says is good, basically.
No, so that's my favourite way to eat in a restaurant is, well, we do it at the field kitchen. It is it's a set menu. There's a vegetarian option, and if you're gluten intolerant, we'll deal with that, but pretty much it's a set option, and it will be brought to the table in large bowls, and you'll share it with whoever you're
I wish I could do it in the restaurant. I really do. We're difficult because we're right on the beachfront, one of our places, and it is a really eclectic mix of people coming in from some people just use us because we're convenient, and burgers and fish and chips are popular. Some people come in.
The only way we've made it work is really by, in the end, we did try to kind of vary the offer and be more flexible and whatever, but in the end, that's what we do. We do it really damn well. It's all about vegetables at the star. And it's not a good place to come from an intimate candlelit dinner with your new girlfriend or something. Exactly. Don't come to the field kitchen. But it just, if you want to come as a large family group, crossing 3 generations and eat on a big long table and take 3 hours having your lunch with your children running around outside is absolutely brilliant. But it doesn't suit everybody occasionally. And I know it sounds like for you, you have to accommodate a much more 100%. Kind of diverse, people with more diverse expectations. And I suppose we took the decision that we weren't going to try and do that. And it was a bit of a struggle, but now people know what we do. And if that's what they want, they come to us. If they want something else, they go somewhere else.
It makes sense. And I'm guessing you're not going to try and roll out 200 of them across the country and make it a thing.
Definitely not. I got approached by quite a few restaurateurs. We won a lot of awards in the early days. Yeah. We were losing loads of money, but everyone thought we were wonderful. And I did think about it, but no, I'm not remotely.
And as somebody in the industry, and in fact, Mark Hicks, who I also interviewed not long ago, his advice to anybody thinking of opening a restaurant, particularly at the moment, was just don't. It's a particularly hard time. I can't leave without asking you just on this last topic, because you really put your money where your mouth is. You talked about capitalism and being kind of anti-capitalist, and I love the quote that I read, talking about people coming and offering you money to roll out stuff, when you said that I think you would rather sell one of your daughters to a brothel than actually accept some of the cash that was being offered. Well, so the most recent thing you did was I don't know if it's give away your company, but you became an employee-owned company. Can you just tell us about that a little bit?
I didn't. I sold it to the staff.
Yes,
over a long period of time. So, and I did sell it at I worked out what I thought I needed to live on for the rest of my life, comfortably. As much money as I thought would make no difference if I had any more, and then I doubled it
just in case
I'd done my sums wrong.
But it was still a lot less than you could have got.
And that actually came to 4 million quid. So and I will take that over a period of years. But I'm a very wealthy person, and no money. I have complete confidence. No more money would make me any happier. But that did adopting that attitude, which I know some people would find challenging, did mean that I could sell the business for that. Whereas the accountants valued it at, I think, 22 million. Yeah. So I took about a fifth or less of the market value, and which has made it. I didn't want to leave it in financial distress, really. So and as it happens, we've done really well. I probably could have charged a bit more, but I'm perfectly happy with what. So now the staff own the business. Well, they own 74%. I did keep a 26% stake, largely because they wanted me to. They wanted to be reassured that I wasn't going to run off to a Caribbean island or something. And customers felt similarly. Yeah. And so now they, essentially have control of the business. They take the profits of the business, and they're in control of their own destiny. And it's just bloody marvelous. I mean, it really is. They are doing so well. The culture at work has changed. I mean, not automatically. We have actually invested a lot in encouraging people to take more responsibility for their actions, really, and encouraging managers not to think that they have, that they're the only people who can make a decision. We're encouraging managers to listen, and co-owners, on the shop floor in the fields, to feel confident that, if they make suggestions, they will be listened to. And it is, we are doing fantastically well. I mean, it is just astonishing. I just think business, and well, not just business, our organisations are just so wasteful of our potential as human beings. I think we're capable of so much more than we give each other credit for. And I think within this setup, it's absolutely fantastic. I was on the streets of London yesterday, actually, I've got to say, and outside Westminster with the Extinction Rebellion. Quite a lot of people from our area have gone up there. Yeah. And I watched them make a decision. They were sitting outside DEFRA, and they decided in the end, after this dispersed kind of leadership techniques they had, where they had a meeting, that they were going to move somewhere else. And it's just phenomenal how they did that with such sort of harmony. They didn't agree on everything, but they managed to come to a decision pretty quickly and enact it so quickly. The police, have a very hierarchical leadership structure, just didn't know what to do with them. I mean, the police are completely at sea. I mean, I think the police that I spoke to are incredibly actually respectful of them. We don't need to live in this highly structured, hierarchical way. There are better ways of making decisions, is what I'm saying, and in all sorts of ways, but I think particularly in business, and particularly at a time where a successful business needs to be flexible and responsive and able to change quickly, and ideally, to be able to handle complexity, which I think we do very well. And the only way we can do that is by having really engaged staff. So the employee ownership has really contributed to that. And if anyone out there who's thinking about selling their business, I would really encourage them to look at employee ownership. I mean, it has just been brilliant for Riverford.
It looks amazing. I think the bigger concern that some people would have, presumably, would be this sort of, the paralysis of analysis for sort of running a company democratically, and you always wanting to do the opposite to just deliberately because you said you were potentially childish. Have you still got the freedom to do it?
I'm probably the worst co-owner in the business, actually, because I don't think I am brilliant at consultation, really. I tend to be impetuous and impatient. Often the way with the entrepreneurial founders. That's why entrepreneurs often are like that. Yeah. But anyway, that thing about paralysis by analysis, drowning in consultation, was a phrase that I heard in the early days quite a lot. And actually, it was, this idea that people in the boardroom are the only people who have the sophistication and the decision making. We're all human beings, and actually it was our staff who really raised this when we were going through that. A lot of people were saying, one of the biggest questions was, isn't this going to slow down decision making? Are we going to be able to be, as commercially successful because we'll just sit around forever making decisions, by which time the world will have moved on? It's not like that at all. It hasn't slowed down decision making one bit. In fact, I would say it's speeded it up. It doesn't have to be like that. Yeah. I mean, it's about how you do it. And there are now loads and loads of, I do think the Extinction Rebellion have got a lot of lessons to teach the world. I'm going to get them to come and talk to Riverford, because I think we could learn a lot from them. There are much, much better ways of organising ourselves than the paradigm that we've had, certainly for my life. Anyway, this sort of hierarchical thing, it just doesn't work anymore. It just really, it's outdated, and I think it's kind of doomed, actually.
I really hope, Guy, that you live another 200 years, because you've got so many ideas that should be implemented that are just going to take some time. So, talking of time, I'm very conscious of the fact you need to get to a shop and buy some ingredients for dinner. So although
I'll go to the fields and pick them.
Are you going to pick them? Okay, even better, before it gets dark and you don't have long left. So although I could continue chatting about it, I guess my biggest thing, my plea would be, maintain that energy. I hope now that you've sold some of the business, and I know you've got a little bit more time, that frees up your time to continue. Everybody should go and watch your Guys Rants YouTube channel, where you talk about these issues very succinctly, actually, in sort of 4 or 5 minutes on each one. You get a phenomenal amount of information across. But yeah, I don't know what the solutions are at the moment. You're really helping with understanding the challenge and understanding the issues. And I think the veg boxes are brilliant, and I hope more people do it. I'm just concerned and I'm a deluded optimist, so I'm normally super upbeat. But the problem looks so massive. Yeah, I don't know where we start in some ways in resolving it. But I hope you bloody work it out, because it looks like you're really focused on it. So thank you.
Change I completely agree. That is, the challenges are huge. The rate of progress is nowhere near fast enough. But change can happen really, really quickly. I mean, and, I think we could be on the cusp of seeing, some really quick change. I think there are a lot of very disillusioned people who want to see something different. It's just a question of them having a voice.
No, I think you're right. I think we could be on the cusp, and Extinction Rebellion are a great example of going, look, enough of being nice and just talking about it. Although, to be fair, their approach is great in the fact that it's about doing things peacefully. I mean, we're going to change the world with yoga on the bridge. I just love it. It's kind of like, we're going to love each other into change rather than fighting. So it is great. Where should people go if they want to follow you or they want to follow Riverford? Where's the best place for people to go? Or are you going to say no bloody idea because you're the crazy entrepreneurial one who won't know the website address? But
well, riverford.co.uk is the website, and there are links to the videos and the publications from there.
All over there.
Yeah.
Are you prolific on any particular social media channel yourself, or?
Personally, I don't do social media. A lot of things that I do and say end up on social media, but it's kind of a selfish thing. Quite early on, the particular element of, anyway, there are some fairly nasty sides of humanity, which I think I'm afraid I experienced on social media early on, and I just decided I didn't want anything to do with it, so I don't do it.
Don't blame you. Good idea, but people can find you and they can see it all,
Yeah.
and you've got some great stuff online. I'll put some info in the show notes as well, where people can find you on humansofhospitality.co.uk.
We do have a fantastic online newsletter, which that we call WikiLeaks, actually, which has
brilliant.
a lot of this on it. Not everything I agree with on it, which is good. We don't all have to agree, but it's I think that is great.
Yeah. Well, the information you send out, we spoke about this, and I'm going to leave it. I'm going to dangle it as a carrot and not explain it again because you've got to go. But this sterilisation of soil and 2,000 litres of diesel per hectare being used on organic farming. Just go and Google that and find the little newsletter where you talk about it, because it's mind blowing.
Other search engines are available.
Oh yes, of course. Yeah, there's one where I think they even plant a tree if you look on it. You're right. We use that as a word now. Guy, thank you so much. It's really appreciated.
Thank you, Mark.
Thank you so much for listening to this week's podcast, and remember that on the website humansofhospitality.co.uk every week we put on some show notes and some links through to the various websites or social media that are mentioned, and we also do a nice little breakdown of that week's conversations into specific topics, so you can jump through the podcast and just listen to some of the highlights if you wish. If you've not done so already, if you could leave us a review on iTunes or one of the other podcast players of your choice, that would be hugely appreciated. Thank you so much, and we'll be out with another episode next Monday.